The cold steel of Knox Redmond's revolver was the only comfort he knew as he rode into Brownsville, Texas, in the spring of 1875. Locals claimed they'd never seen the man smile not even once in the 5 years he'd been drifting through the territory. His reputation preceded him. Fastest draw west of the Mississippi, coldest eyes this side of the grave. Knox didn't come to make friends. He came because he'd heard Brownsville needed a new deputy, and he needed a place to winter his soul. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly as Knox dismounted from his dappled gray stallion, Storm. Dust clung to his worn leather boots and faded denim pants. His face, partially hidden beneath the shadow of his black Stetson, revealed nothing but a stern jawline covered with 3 days' worth of stubble and eyes that had seen too much death. Sheriff Thomas Miller watched from the jailhouse porch as Knox tied his horse to the post. "You must be Redmond," he called out, his voice carrying across the quiet street. Knox merely nodded, approaching with long, purposeful strides. "Not much for talking, are you?" Sheriff Miller extended his hand. "Welcome to Brownsville. Word of your work in Fort Worth reached us. Could use a man with your skills." Knox shook the offered hand firmly, his calloused palm rough against the sheriff's. "Just need work, sir, nothing more." "Well, you'll find plenty here. Town's growing faster than we can manage, railroads bringing in new folks every week." The sheriff gestured toward the badge in his hand. "Pays fair, room above the jailhouse comes with the job." Knox accepted the deputy's badge without ceremony, pinning it to his vest without so much as glancing at it. "When do I start?" "You already have." Sheriff Miller chuckled, though Knox's expression remained unchanged. "There's a town meeting tonight at the church. Good place to meet the townspeople you'll be protecting." Knox had no intention of socializing, but he nodded his agreement anyway. He'd learned the faces he needed to know in time. The rest didn't matter. After settling his few possessions in the spare room and tending to Storm, Knox found himself walking the streets of Brownsville as evening approached. The town was larger than he expected, a proper main street with businesses on both sides, side streets with modest homes, and construction everywhere. The railroad had indeed changed things. The church bell tolled, signaling the start of the town meeting. Knox arrived deliberately late, slipping into the back pew as Mayor Hoffman was introducing the town's newest residents. The wooden church was packed with people, all crammed into pews and standing along the walls. Knox scanned the crowd, memorizing faces out of habit. "And we're pleased to welcome Miss Beatrice Hayes, who will be taking over as our new schoolteacher." The mayor gestured toward a young woman who stood up from a front pew. Knox's assessment was automatic mid-20s, auburn hair pinned beneath a modest hat, blue dress that had seen better days but was meticulously kept. She turned slightly, and he caught a glimpse of her profile, delicate nose, full lips, determined chin. Nothing that should have captured his attention for more than a moment. Then she smiled, and Knox felt something stir inside him, something he thought had died in the Kansas dust 6 years ago. "Thank you, Mayor Hoffman," Beatrice said, her voice clear and confident. "I'm looking forward to starting classes next Monday. Any children between the ages of 6 and 16 are welcome. I'll also be offering evening classes for adults wishing to improve their reading or arithmetic." From the back of the room, Knox could see how her enthusiasm seemed to infect the crowd. A few people called out questions, which she answered with quick wit. When someone made a comment about her youth, she laughed, a genuine sound that rippled through the church like water over stones in a clear stream. That laugh caught Knox off guard. It wasn't the polite tittering of society ladies he'd encountered in his travels, nor was it the bawdy cackle of saloon girls. It was honest and full of life, everything he was not. Sheriff Miller nudged him, breaking his trance. "That's our new deputy, Knox Redmond," he announced, drawing unwanted attention Knox's way. The crowd turned, and Knox tipped his hat slightly but remained standing against the back wall, his face impassive. He noticed Miss Hayes looking at him with curiosity, her head tilted slightly as if trying to solve a puzzle. The meeting continued with discussions of railroad schedules, water rights, and complaints about cattle from the nearby Sutton Ranch trampling gardens. Knox listened with half an ear, making mental notes of potential trouble spots. Throughout it all, he found his gaze drifting back to the schoolteacher, whose animated expressions contrasted sharply with the weariness he felt in his bones. When the meeting ended, Knox slipped out before the socializing began. He had no desire for the handshaking and small talk that would inevitably follow. He stepped into the cool night air, lighting a cigarette as he surveyed the quiet street. Deputy Redmond. The voice behind him belonged to Miss Hayes. He turned, dropping his cigarette and crushing it under his boot out of respect. "Madam," he acknowledged with a slight nod, "I didn't mean to interrupt your evening." She clasped her hands in front of her, studying him with intelligent green eyes. "I just wanted to introduce myself properly, Beatrice Hayes." She extended her hand. Knox hesitated before accepting it. Her fingers were slim, but her grip was surprisingly firm. "Knox Redmond. You don't smile much, do you, Deputy?" The question wasn't accusatory, merely curious. "Don't find much reason to, madam," she nodded as if his answer confirmed something she'd already suspected. "Well, perhaps Brownsville will give you reason. It seems a friendly enough place. Been to many that seemed friendly at first, and yet here you are." Her eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. There must be something worth staying for. Knox didn't know how to respond to that. Few people tried to engage him in real conversation anymore. His reputation and demeanor typically discouraged it. "The school is in terrible condition," she continued, changing the subject. "Sheriff Miller mentioned you're handy with tools. I was hoping you might assess what needs fixing before classes begin." "Sheriff assumes too much," Knox replied, though it wasn't a refusal. "I can pay you for your time," she offered. Knox shook his head. "No need. Part of keeping the peace is making sure children have somewhere safe to learn." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to please her. "Tomorrow afternoon, around 3. Her smile returned, brightening her entire face. "I'll be there," he agreed, not entirely sure why he was committing to this. "Thank you, Deputy. Good night." She turned and walked away, her steps light despite the obvious fatigue in her shoulders. Knox watched her go, puzzled by the brief conversation. It had been years since he'd agreed to help someone without obligation or payment. Years since he'd noticed the color of someone's eyes or the way they smiled. He didn't like it noticing things led to caring, and caring led to pain. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. The next morning found Knox patrolling the streets before dawn, his boots the only sound in the sleeping town. He checked doors, peered into dark alleys, and took note of the 3 men passed out behind the saloon. Sheriff Miller had been right. Brownsville was growing fast, bringing all the problems that came with rapid expansion. By mid-morning, he'd broken up 2 fights, warned a group of cowboys about shooting their pistols in town, and escorted a drunk to the jail cell to sleep it off. Nothing unusual, nothing he couldn't handle. At precisely 3 o'clock, Knox arrived at the schoolhouse, a dilapidated building at the edge of town that had clearly seen better days. The roof sagged in one corner, several windows were cracked or missing entirely, and the steps to the front door looked ready to collapse under the slightest weight. Beatrice was already there, sleeves rolled up, attempting to sweep decades of dust from the wooden floor. She looked up when the door creaked open, a smudge of dirt across her cheek. "Deputy Redmond, right on time." She propped the broom against a desk. "As you can see, we have our work cut out for us." Knox surveyed the room with a critical eye. "This place should be condemned." "Perhaps," she agreed, "but it's all we have. 28 children are counting on starting school on Monday." Knox walked the perimeter of the room, testing floorboards, examining window frames, running his hands along the walls to feel for dampness. "Roof's the biggest concern. Won't matter how clean you get it if rain pours in. Can it be fixed?" "Yes." Knox moved to the corner where the roof sagged most noticeably. "Probably rotted support beam. Replace that, shore up the rest, new shingles where needed. And the windows, easier fix. Glass can be ordered from Dallas." He tested the stairs to the small second floor. "These need replacing entirely, too dangerous." Beatrice followed him around, taking notes in a small leather-bound book. "What about the stove? Winter will be here before we know it." Knox examined the rusty pot-bellied stove in the corner. Chimneys blocked, stove itself needs new parts. He straightened up, wiping dust from his hands. This is more than one man can fix in a few days. I see. Her shoulders slumped slightly, but only for a moment before she squared them again. Well, I appreciate your honesty. Perhaps the mayor didn't say I wouldn't help, Knox interrupted. Said it's more than one man can fix alone. Hope flickered across her face. Do you have someone in mind? There's men in town looking for work. Carpenter named Wilson, his brother's a glazier, the Suarez boys no roofing. Knox found himself making mental calculations, materials, labor, time, with enough hands could be done by Sunday evening. That would be extraordinary, Beatrice said, her voice soft with gratitude. But I'm afraid the town council only allocated $20 for repairs. That won't cover what you're describing. Knox considered this. Leave that to me. Deputy, town needs a proper school, he said firmly. Children deserve better than this. The smile that bloomed across her face made something shift in Knox's chest, a sensation so foreign he almost mistook it for indigestion. Thank you, she said, her eyes bright with emotion. Truly? Knox nodded, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Need to measure for lumber, be back tomorrow with supplies. As he turned to leave, Beatrice called after him. Deputy Redmond, he paused at the door. I get the feeling you've done this before. Building, I mean. Knox hesitated before answering. Used to be a carpenter before. Before what? Before I wasn't anymore. He touched the brim of his hat and left, unwilling to explain further. That evening, Knox made his way to the Longhorn Saloon. It wasn't his custom to frequent such establishments. He'd seen too many good men lose themselves to whiskey and cards, but tonight he had business to conduct. The saloon was crowded, smoky, and loud. A piano player hammered out a lively tune, while cowboys fresh off the trail whooped and hollered at the dancing girls. Knox spotted his target at a corner table, Raymond Sutton, owner of the largest cattle ranch in the county, playing poker with a group of well-dressed men. Knox approached the table, standing silently until Sutton noticed him. Well, if it isn't our new lawman, Sutton drawled, cigar clamped between his teeth. Care to join the game, deputy? Need a word, Knox replied, his voice low enough that only Sutton could hear. Private. Sutton raised an eyebrow but excused himself from the table. This better be important, I'm up almost 400. Knox led him to a quiet corner. School needs fixing, town's short on funds. Sutton let out a bark of laughter. And this concerns me. How exactly? Your 3 youngest attend that school come Monday, Knox said flatly. Roof's about to collapse, windows are broken, stairs aren't safe. The town council can't afford what's needed, Knox interrupted, but you can. Sutton's eyes narrowed. Why should I foot the bill for the entire town's schoolhouse? Knox met his gaze steadily. Because your cattle broke through the Henderson fence last month, trampled their entire corn crop. That's not proven, Sutton protested, though his expression had grown wary. Don't need to be proven if everyone knows it's true, Knox replied. Henderson's talking about filing a formal complaint. That means a judge from Austin, investigation, compensation. Are you threatening me, deputy? Knox shook his head. Stating facts, Henderson's poor, 4 children to feed. Winter coming might make a man desperate. Sutton puffed on his cigar, considering. How much? 200 ought to cover materials. Got men willing to work if they're paid fair. $300, Sutton scoffed. Highway robbery. Cheaper than a lawsuit, Knox countered. And your children get a safe school. After a long moment, Sutton nodded grudgingly. Fine, I'll have the money sent to your office tomorrow, but I want the Henderson matter dropped. I'll talk to him, Knox promised. Make it right. Sutton returned to his game and Knox slipped out of the saloon, satisfied with the outcome. He'd bend the law a little, but for a good cause. The schoolhouse would be fixed, Henderson would get compensation for his crop, and no one needed to involve courts or judges. As he walked back to his room above the jail, Knox tried not to think about why he'd gone to such lengths. It was just part of his job to ensure the town ran smoothly, he told himself. Nothing to do with the way Beatrice Hayes' face had lit up when he'd offered to help, or how her laugh had sounded like something from another lifetime, a better one. The next morning, Knox found Henderson at his farm and made him an offer. $50 for the crop damage, paid from Sutton's pocket in exchange for dropping the matter entirely. The farmer, a weathered man with more children than he could comfortably feed, accepted readily. With that settled, Knox headed to the lumber mill to order the materials needed for the schoolhouse. By noon, wagons began delivering lumber, glass, nails, and shingles to the schoolhouse. Knox had arranged for Wilson, the carpenter, to oversee the work while he continued his deputy duties. But whenever he had free time, he found himself drawn back to the school, where Beatrice directed volunteers with surprising authority. "You've gathered quite the workforce," Knox remarked on the second day, watching as a dozen men worked on various aspects of the building. Beatrice wiped sweat from her brow, leaving another streak of dirt across her forehead. Once word spread that materials were paid for, people volunteered. Seems everyone wants their children to have a proper education. She looked at him curiously. "Sheriff Miller mentioned you convinced Sutton to fund the repairs. How did you manage that?" Knox shrugged. "Just pointed out it was in his interest." "Well, whatever you said worked miracles." She gestured to the progress, already made new support beams, half the roof reshingled, windows being fitted with fresh glass. "At this rate, we'll open on schedule." For the next 3 days, the transformation of the schoolhouse continued. Knox found himself spending every free moment there, fixing the stairs personally, rebuilding the porch, repairing the stove, and constructing new desks. He worked mostly in silence, but occasionally Beatrice would bring him water or coffee, sitting nearby as he worked. "You were more than just a carpenter, weren't you?" she asked on the third day, watching as he expertly crafted a joint without measuring. Knox continued working, his hands never faltering. "Did some building in Colorado, mining camps mostly. You're very skilled." Her voice held genuine admiration. "Just takes practice. And patience," she added. "Something tells me you weren't always so reserved." Knox paused, hammer in mid-swing. "People change, Miss Hayes." "Indeed they do," she agreed, studying him. "Usually for a reason." He resumed hammering, not responding to her implied question. "I lost my parents in a typhoid outbreak," she offered unexpectedly. 3 years ago in St. Louis. That's what brought me west, needed a fresh start." Knox set down his hammer, finally meeting her eyes. "Sorry for your loss." "Thank you." She traced a pattern in the sawdust with her finger. "It's why I became a teacher. My father was a professor. He believed education was the greatest gift one could give." Knox nodded, understanding the need to honor those lost by carrying on their values. "What about you, deputy?" "What brought you to Brownsville?" For reasons he couldn't explain, Knox found himself answering honestly. "Nowhere else to go." Beatrice smiled sadly, as if she understood exactly what he meant. "Well, I'm glad your nowhere led you here. The children will have a proper school because of you." "Because of Sutton's money," he corrected. "Money that wouldn't have materialized without your intervention." She stood, brushing sawdust from her skirt. "You've done a good thing here, Deputy Redmond, whether you'll admit it or not." As she walked away to direct the painting of the exterior, Knox found himself watching her longer than necessary. The way she interacted with the volunteers, laughing at their jokes, thanking them sincerely for their efforts, reminded him of someone he'd tried hard to forget. On Sunday evening, the work was completed. The schoolhouse stood transformed, roof repaired, windows gleaming, porch and stairs rebuilt, interior clean and furnished with 25 new desks. Even the blackboard had been replaced and a small bell installed in the tower. The volunteers and their families gathered for an impromptu celebration, bringing food and drink to share. Knox remained on the periphery, uncomfortable with the festivities but unwilling to leave just yet. "There you are." Beatrice approached, holding 2 plates of food. "You should eat something. You've barely stopped working for days." Knox accepted the plate with a nod of thanks. "Place looks good." "It's magnificent," she corrected, her eyes shining with pride and gratitude. "The children will be so excited tomorrow." They ate in companionable silence, watching as townspeople admired the renovated schoolhouse. Several parents approached Beatrice, thanking her for her dedication. Knox noticed how she deflected praise, always mentioning the community effort and the generosity of contributors. As the celebration wound down and people began heading home, Beatrice found Knox again. "Walk me home, deputy. It's getting dark." Knox nodded, falling into step beside her as they headed toward the boarding house where she stayed. The summer evening was warm, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I never properly thanked you," she said as they walked, "for everything you did. Just doing my job." "No," she countered firmly. "Your job is to keep the peace, not rebuild schoolhouses." "What you did went far beyond duty." Knox didn't know how to respond to that. He'd spent years doing only what was required of him, nothing more, nothing less. The effort he'd put into the schoolhouse surprised even himself. "Will you come tomorrow?" she asked, "for the first day of classes? The children would like to thank their benefactor." "Sutton's their benefactor. You know what I mean." She stopped walking, turning to face him directly. "Please come, it would mean a lot to me." The sincerity in her voice made refusal impossible. "What time?" "9 o'clock. Her smile was worth the discomfort he felt at the prospect of being the center of attention. They reached the boarding house, a well-kept two-story building on a quiet side street. Beatrice paused at the front gate. "Good night, Deputy Redmond, and thank you again." "Knox," he said suddenly. "Name's Knox." Her smile widened. "Good night, Knox." As he walked back to his room above the jail, Knox found himself wondering what exactly had gotten into him. In 6 years, he hadn't allowed anyone to use his first name, hadn't volunteered information about his past, hadn't gone out of his way to help someone without clear obligation. Yet here he was, doing all three. The next morning, Knox stood at the back of the crowded schoolhouse, watching as excited children filled the new desks. Parents milled about, admiring the renovations and chatting with neighbors. At precisely 9 o'clock, Beatrice rang the bell, bringing the room to order. "Welcome, children, to our first day of school," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "Before we begin, I want to thank everyone who helped make this wonderful schoolhouse possible." She acknowledged the various craftsmen and volunteers, then called the Sutton family forward to thank them for their generous contribution. Finally, her eyes found Knox at the back of the room. "And special thanks to Deputy Redmond, without whom none of this would have happened." "Deputy, would you come forward, please?" Knox felt a moment of panic, but the expectant faces of the children left him little choice. He made his way to the front, hat in hand, uncomfortable with the attention. "Children, this is Deputy Knox Redmond," Beatrice introduced. "He organized all the repairs and worked tirelessly to make sure you had a safe, comfortable place to learn." A little girl, no more than 7, approached Knox with a bunch of wildflowers. "Thank you, Mr. Deputy," she said shyly, offering the makeshift bouquet. Awkwardly, Knox accepted the flowers. "You're welcome, miss." The simple exchange prompted applause from the assembled parents and children. Knox's ears burned with embarrassment, but when he caught Beatrice's gaze filled with warmth and something he couldn't quite name, he felt that strange shift in his chest again. "3 cheers for Deputy Redmond," someone called, and the room erupted in hurrahs. Knox retreated as soon as politeness allowed, returning to the familiar routine of his duties. Yet throughout the day, as he patrolled the streets and settled minor disputes, his thoughts kept returning to the schoolhouse and its teacher. In the weeks that followed, Knox fell into a new pattern. Days were spent upholding the law in Brownsville, but evenings often found him at the schoolhouse, helping Beatrice with various projects, building bookshelves, constructing a fence around the property, setting up a small garden where she planned to teach children about plants and growing food. These evening hours revealed a different side of Beatrice Hayes. Away from her students, she was both more relaxed and more complex than he'd initially realized. She was well educated, with strong opinions about politics, literature, and social reform. She could quote Shakespeare and calculate complex mathematics with equal ease. But she was also practical, funny, and unafraid of hard work. Most surprising to Knox was how comfortable he felt in her presence. Their silences never felt strained, and when they did speak, he found himself sharing more than he had with anyone in years, small details about places he'd been, things he'd seen. Never about what had changed him, but Beatrice never pressed. Instead, she shared her own stories growing up in St. Louie as a professor's daughter, losing her parents to typhoid, teaching in Chicago before heading west. Her tales were often punctuated by laughter, that same infectious sound that had first caught his attention. One evening in early October, as they planted bulbs that would bloom in the spring, Beatrice asked casually, "Will you still be in Brownsville when these flowers come up?" The question startled Knox. He hadn't thought beyond the next week, let alone months ahead. His life for years had been transient, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots, literal or figurative. "Don't know," he answered honestly. Beatrice nodded, continuing to dig small holes in the soil. "I hope you will be. The town's better for having you here." "Town was fine before I came." "Perhaps," she conceded, "but it's safer now, and the children adore you." That was another unexpected development. Despite his efforts to maintain his stern demeanor, the schoolchildren had decided Deputy Redmond was their personal hero. They waved when they saw him in town, brought him drawings, and stopped to chat about their lessons. "Children are easy to impress," he muttered. "Children are excellent judges of character," Beatrice countered. "They see past pretenses." Knox didn't respond, focusing instead on the task at hand. But her words stayed with him, along with her question about spring. Would he still be in Brownsville when the bulbs they were planting pushed through the soil? The thought of leaving caused an unexpected pang in his chest. As autumn deepened, the relationship between Knox and Beatrice became the subject of town gossip. Sheriff Miller teased him good-naturedly about his frequent visits to the schoolhouse. Mrs. Wilson, the carpenter's wife, made pointed comments about suitable matches whenever Knox visited their hardware store. Even the saloon girls had taken to asking after his schoolteacher when he made his nightly rounds. Knox ignored the gossip. What existed between him and Beatrice was friendship. Nothing more, though, if he were honest with himself. His feelings had grown considerably more complicated than that. The first frost came in late October, transforming the landscape with delicate white crystals. Knox arrived at the school early that morning to light the stove, ensuring the building would be warm when students arrived. He found Beatrice already there, attempting to start the fire herself. "Let me," he offered, taking the matches from her trembling hands. "Your fingers are half frozen." "Thank you." She huddled near the stove as he skillfully arranged kindling and larger logs, soon coaxing a steady flame. "I'm afraid I'm not very good at this. Growing up in the city, we had modern heating." "You'll learn," Knox assured her, adding another log. "Just takes practice." "Like most worthwhile things," she agreed, warming her hands. "Speaking of which, Sheriff Miller mentioned you might be staying on permanently. Is that true?" Knox straightened up, brushing dust from his hands. "Offered me the job, hasn't made up his mind about retiring yet." Hope flickered across her face. "And have you decided?" Still thinking on it. "Well, I hope you accept," she said simply. "Brownsville needs a sheriff like you." Before Knox could respond, the first students began arriving, bundled against the cold and excited about the frost. The moment passed, but Knox found himself contemplating Sheriff Miller's offer with new seriousness throughout the day. That evening, as Knox made his final rounds, he noticed lights still burning in the schoolhouse. Concerned, he approached, hand instinctively resting on his revolver. The door was unlocked, another worry, but inside he found only Beatrice, surrounded by papers at her desk. "Working late," he observed, relaxing his posture. She looked up, startled, then smiled in recognition. "Report cards, end of the month already." She gestured to the stacks of papers. "Please come in. The company would be welcome." Knox hesitated, then entered, closing the door against the cold night air. "Should lock your door after dark in Brownsville. Surely it's safe enough." "Mostly," he agreed, taking a seat on one of the student benches. "Still, better careful than sorry." Beatrice set down her pen, stretching her fingers. "I suppose you're right. Old habits from St. Louis where we never locked our doors." "Different times," Knox said quietly. "Indeed." She studied him for a moment. "You know, in all our conversations, you've never mentioned where you're from originally." Knox tensed slightly. "Moved around a lot as a boy, but you must have called somewhere home." He considered deflecting again, but something in her patient expression made him answer truthfully. "Small farm in Missouri, nothing special." "Is that where you learned carpentry?" "From my father," he confirmed, surprising himself with the admission. "Built our house, barn, furniture, taught me everything he knew." Beatrice's eyes softened. "He sounds like a good man." He was. Knox hadn't spoken of his father in years, yet the words came easily with Beatrice. "Honest, hard-working, fair, like his son," she observed. Knox shook his head. "Not like me, he never—" He stopped, unwilling to continue down that path. Beatrice seemed to sense his reluctance. "Well, I think he'd be proud of the school you helped rebuild, of the skills you've put to good use here." "Maybe." Knox stood, suddenly uncomfortable with the direction of their conversation. "It's late, should get you home." "Of course." She gathered her papers, understanding in her eyes. "Just let me organize these for tomorrow." As they walked through the quiet streets toward her boarding house, a comfortable silence between them, Knox found himself wondering what his father would think of his life now, of the man he'd become after everything that had happened. Whether there was still enough of the boy his father had raised left inside him. "Knox," Beatrice's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Is everything all right?" "Fine," he replied automatically, then more honestly, "just thinking about." She looked up at him, her face illuminated by moonlight, concern evident in her expression. "Past, future," he shrugged. "Things better left alone." They reached her boarding house, pausing at the gate as had become their custom. Instead of saying good night, however, Beatrice surprised him. "There's a harvest dance this Saturday at the town hall," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I was wondering if you might attend." Knox stared at her, caught off guard. "Don't dance." "Everyone can dance with the right partner," she replied with a small smile. "But even if you don't, your company would be welcome." The implication was clear. She was asking for his escort, a public acknowledgement of whatever was growing between them. Knox felt a familiar panic rising. Getting closer meant risking pain, risking loss. "Not much for social gatherings," he said finally. Disappointment flickered across her face, quickly masked. "I understand, it was just a thought." She opened the gate, stepping through. "Good night, Knox." "Night," he replied, watching as she climbed the porch steps and disappeared inside. As he walked back to his room, Knox berated himself for his cowardice. It was just a dance, nothing more. Yet it represented something he'd deliberately avoided for years: connection, attachment, the possibility of caring for someone who could be taken away, just like Sarah had been. The name he'd refused to even think for so long surfaced unexpectedly, bringing with it a flood of memories: Sarah's smile as they'd built their small cabin in the Colorado mountains, her excitement when they'd discovered she was expecting, the plans they'd made for their future. And then the raid, the fire, the impossible choices he'd made that day. Knox entered his sparse room, lighting the lamp and sinking onto his narrow bed. He'd spent 6 years running from those memories, from the guilt and grief that threatened to consume him. 6 years building walls around what remained of his heart, determined never to be vulnerable again. And now a schoolteacher with laughing green eyes and a stubborn chin was making those walls crumble, one smile at a time. Sleep eluded him that night as he wrestled with fears both old and new. By morning, he'd made a decision. He would attend the dance not as Beatrice's escort, but as the town deputy maintaining order. It was a compromise with himself, a small step toward something he wasn't ready to name. The harvest dance transformed the town hall into a festive space, with autumn leaves, corn husks, and pumpkins decorating every surface. A small band played lively tunes as couples twirled across the wooden floor. Tables laden with food and drink lined the walls, and nearly every resident of Brownsville seemed to be in attendance. Knox stood near the entrance, ostensibly keeping watch but actually scanning the crowd for one particular face. When he finally spotted Beatrice, his breath caught. She wore a dress of deep blue that complemented her auburn hair, which had been arranged in soft curls instead of her usual practical bun. She was talking with Mayor Hoffman's wife, laughing at something the older woman had said. As if sensing his gaze, Beatrice looked up, her eyes finding his across the crowded room. She smiled, excusing herself from Mrs. Hoffman and making her way toward him. "Deputy Redmond," she greeted formally, though her eyes held a warmer message. "I'm glad you decided to attend after all." Official capacity, he explained, gesturing to his badge, of course. She nodded, playing along with his pretense. Any troublemakers to report, just Mrs. Peterson's punch, strong enough to fell a horse. Beatrice laughed, that same musical sound that had first caught his attention months ago. I'll consider myself warned. She glanced at the dancers, then back to Knox. Are you certain you won't dance? Just one. Knox hesitated, torn between desire and fear. Before he could respond, Mayor Hoffman appeared at Beatrice's side. Miss Hayes. You promised me the next dance, I believe, he said jovially. So I did, Beatrice acknowledged, though her eyes remained on Knox. Perhaps another time, Deputy. Knox watched as she was led away, feeling an unexpected surge of jealousy as the mayor's hand rested on her waist during the dance. Throughout the evening, Beatrice danced with several partners: the doctor, the banker, even Sheriff Miller, but periodically, her gaze would find Knox, still standing sentinel near the door. As the night wore on, Knox noticed a new arrival: Jasper Collins, a cattle buyer known for his quick temper and quicker hands with the ladies. Collins had been drinking heavily, judging by his unsteady gait as he approached the refreshment table. Knox watched warily as Collins helped himself to punch, then turned his attention to the dancers. His gaze fixed predatorily on Beatrice, who was unaware of his presence as she chatted with friends between dances. When Collins began moving in her direction, Knox straightened, every instinct on alert. Evening, pretty lady, Collins slurred, interrupting Beatrice's conversation. Save a dance for me, Mr. Collins, she acknowledged politely. I'm afraid I was just about to rest for a bit. Perhaps another time, Collins frowned, reaching for her arm. Now, don't be like that, just one dance. Beatrice stepped back. No, thank you. Come on, sweetheart, Collins insisted, grabbing her wrist. Don't be so, the lady said no. Knox's voice was quiet but carried an unmistakable threat as he appeared beside them. Collins scowled, not releasing Beatrice. Mind your own business, Redmond. Me and the schoolteacher are just having a friendly conversation. Doesn't look friendly from here, Knox observed, his hand moving subtly toward his revolver. Let her go. Something in Knox's eyes must have penetrated Collins's alcohol-fogged brain because he released Beatrice's wrist abruptly. Fine, plenty of other ladies here anyway, he sneered at Knox. Didn't know she was spoken for. Knox didn't correct him, merely watching as Collins stumbled away, muttering under his breath. Thank you, Beatrice said softly, rubbing her wrist. Did he hurt you? Knox asked, anger still simmering beneath his calm exterior. No, just startled me. She glanced at the retreating figure of Collins. Does he often behave that way? Often enough. Knox's jaw tightened. Should probably head home, I'll walk you. But the dance isn't over, she protested. Seen enough, Knox replied, not elaborating that what he'd seen enough of was other men dancing with her, touching her, making her laugh. Beatrice studied his face, then nodded. Very well, let me get my shawl. They walked in silence through the October night, stars brilliant overhead in the clear sky. The air held a definite chill now, promising winter wasn't far behind. Would you have danced with me? Beatrice asked suddenly, breaking the quiet. If I'd asked directly, instead of suggesting you might dance with someone, Knox considered the question seriously. Probably not, he admitted. Been a long time since I danced. But you can dance. A ghost of a memory surfaced, teaching Sarah to waltz in their half-built cabin, no music except what he hummed, both of them laughing at their missteps on the uneven floor. Used to, he said finally. They reached her boarding house, but instead of saying goodnight at the gate as usual, Beatrice took his hand. Dance with me now, she suggested, her eyes bright in the moonlight. Just once, no one watching. Knox stared at their joined hands, feeling his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble entirely. Beatrice, please, she whispered. One dance, then I'll ask for nothing more. Something in her voice, in the way she looked at him, hopeful yet preparing for disappointment, broke through his final defenses. With a barely perceptible nod, Knox placed his free hand tentatively at her waist. Beatrice smiled, positioning her hand on his shoulder. There was no music except the distant sounds of the town hall band carried on the night air, but it was enough. They began to move in slow, simple steps, Knox remembering the rhythm of the waltz as if it had been days rather than years since he'd last danced. "See. You haven't forgotten," Beatrice murmured, following his lead effortlessly. Knox didn't respond, too focused on the feeling of her in his arms, the scent of lavender that clung to her hair, the way the moonlight illuminated her face. For just this moment, he allowed himself to imagine a different life, one where he wasn't haunted by the past, where he could offer someone like Beatrice Hayes more than damaged goods. The dance ended naturally, both of them slowing to a stop. But neither moved apart immediately, standing close enough that Knox could feel the warmth of her breath. "Thank you," Beatrice said softly, her eyes searching his face. "For the dance, for everything." Knox knew he should step back, say goodnight, maintain the careful distance he'd kept all these months. Instead, he found himself leaning forward, drawn by something stronger than fear or reason. Their lips met in a gentle kiss, brief but unmistakable in its meaning. When Knox pulled back, he saw surprise in Beatrice's eyes and something else, something that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. "I should go," he said roughly, releasing her and stepping back. Beatrice touched her fingers to her lips, as if trying to preserve the sensation. "Knox, good night, Miss Hayes." He reverted to formality, a desperate attempt to rebuild the walls that had just collapsed completely. Without waiting for her response, Knox turned and walked away, his mind in turmoil. What had he done? What had he started that he couldn't possibly finish? Beatrice deserved someone whole, someone untainted by the choices he'd made, not a man who hadn't even smiled in 6 years. Knox didn't sleep that night, alternating between reliving the kiss and castigating himself for his weakness. By morning, he'd convinced himself the best course of action was to maintain professional distance. He would be polite but reserved, giving Beatrice the opportunity to realize her mistake and direct her affections toward someone more deserving. His resolution lasted exactly 3 days. On the 4th day, Knox was summoned to the school to deal with a snake that had found its way into the classroom, sending children into screams and desks overturned. He dispatched the harmless garter snake quickly, releasing it far from the building as the children watched in fascination. "You've quite a way with children, Deputy," Beatrice observed as the students filed back inside. "Have you considered teaching them about local wildlife? Many are terrified of creatures they simply don't understand." The request was professional, her tone carefully neutral, but her eyes held a question he wasn't ready to answer. Not much of a teacher. "I disagree." She gathered her composure, clearly prepared for his withdrawal, "but I understand if you're too busy." As she turned to follow her students, Knox found himself speaking. "Friday afternoon, if it fits your schedule." Beatrice paused, surprise evident in her expression. "Friday would be perfect, thank you." That small interaction broke the ice that had formed between them since the night of the dance. While both carefully avoided any reference to the kiss they'd shared, they gradually resumed their evening conversations at the schoolhouse. Knox even found himself looking forward to the impromptu wildlife lesson he'd agreed to conduct. Friday afternoon found him standing before 28 attentive children, more nervous than he'd been facing armed bandits. With Beatrice's encouraging nods, however, he began describing the various snakes, spiders, and predators of the region which were dangerous, which were beneficial, how to avoid trouble with each. The children listened with rapt attention, asking questions that revealed both curiosity and misconceptions. Knox found himself relaxing as the lesson progressed, drawing diagrams on the blackboard and even sharing a few anecdotes from his travels. "Deputy Redmond, have you ever been bit by a rattlesnake?" asked Tommy Wilson, the carpenter's son. "Once," Knox admitted, "up in the Rockies, not an experience I'd recommend." "Did you die?" asked 6-year-old Lucy Peterson with wide eyes. Unexpected laughter bubbled up in Knox's chest at the child's earnest question. Before he could stop himself, a small chuckle escaped, the first genuine laugh he'd allowed himself in years. "No, Lucy, I didn't die," he answered, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "Though it felt like I might for a while." The sound of something dropping made Knox look up. Beatrice stood at the back of the room, a book fallen from her hands, staring at him with an expression of wonder. He realized immediately what had startled her: his laugh, his almost smile. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken meaning. The school bell broke the spell, signaling the end of the day. As children gathered their things, thanking Deputy Redmond for the interesting lesson, Knox found himself unable to look away from Beatrice. The way she was looking at him, as if she'd witnessed something miraculous, made his chest tight with emotions he'd long suppressed. After the last child departed, Beatrice approached slowly. "You laughed," she said softly, wonder still evident in her voice. Knox shifted uncomfortably. Just surprised by the question. "It was lovely," she continued, stopping before him. "Your laugh, your smile, even that small one, wasn't much of a smile, it was to me." Her eyes searched his face. "Knox, what happened to you? What took your smile away?" The direct question hit him like a physical blow. No one had dared ask him so plainly before. Most were too intimidated, too wary of his reputation. But Beatrice Hayes had never been easily intimidated. Knox turned away, moving toward the window. Outside, children played in the schoolyard, their laughter carrying on the crisp autumn air. For a long moment he said nothing, wrestling with the weight of secrets kept too long. "Had a wife once," he finally said, his voice low. "Sarah, in Colorado, 6 years ago." Behind him, he heard Beatrice's soft intake of breath, but she remained silent, giving him space to continue at his own pace. "Built us a cabin near a mining camp called Silver Creek. I worked as a carpenter for the mines. Sarah kept a garden, started teaching some of the miners' children." The memories flooded back, painfully vivid. She was expecting our first child. Knox's hands gripped the windowsill, knuckles white with tension. Camp was raided. Renegades, deserters from both armies after the war, turned outlaws, came looking for the mine's payroll. He could still hear the gunshots, the screams, smell the smoke as buildings burned. "I was working at the far end of the camp when they came, by the time I got back to our cabin." His voice faltered. Beatrice moved beside him, not touching, just present. "You don't have to continue," she said gently. But now that he'd started, Knox found he couldn't stop. The story that had been bottled inside him for 6 years demanded release. Cabin was on fire. Sarah was inside. I could hear her calling for me. His voice grew hollow. 2 raiders outside, guarding the door. I killed them both. Didn't even think about it, just drew and fired. In his mind's eye, he could still see their bodies falling, his only thought getting to Sarah. Got inside, found her, the smoke, she couldn't breathe, couldn't walk. I carried her out, but it was too late. The words caught in his throat. Lost her, lost our child, lost everything. Silence fell between them, heavy with shared grief. Outside, the children's play continued, oblivious to the painful confession being made within the schoolhouse walls. "The men you killed," Beatrice said finally. "It was self-defense. You were trying to save your wife." Knox shook his head. "Wasn't just them. Tracked the rest of the gang for months afterward, found them one by one." His voice hardened. 7 men. Made sure none of them would ever hurt anyone else again. He waited for her shock, her disgust, her fear. Waited for her to step away from the killer he'd just confessed to being. Instead, Beatrice's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his own. "You carried that alone all this time," she said, her voice thick with emotion. The grief, the guilt, the weight of it all. Knox looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face. There were tears in her eyes, but not fear, not judgment, just compassion. "What I did, who I became." He tried to explain, "There's no coming back from that." "I disagree," she said firmly. "The man who rebuilt our school, who teaches children about wildlife, who protects this town, that's who you are now, Knox. The past shaped you, but it doesn't define you." Her words struck a chord deep within him, touching a hope he'd thought long extinguished. "Don't know if I can believe that." "Then let me believe it for both of us," she replied, her free hand coming up to touch his face gently, "until you can believe it yourself." Knox closed his eyes, leaning slightly into her touch. For the first time in 6 years, he allowed himself to imagine a future not defined by loss and retribution. A future that might include laughter again, might include love. "I can't promise you anything," he said honestly, opening his eyes to meet her gaze. Don't know if I remember how to be normal, Beatrice smiled, the warmth reaching her eyes. I'm not asking for promises, just for you to stay open to possibilities. I can try, he offered, the words feeling like both a surrender and a beginning. That's all anyone can do, she assured him, rising on tiptoes to press a soft kiss to his cheek. Now, would you care to walk me home, Deputy Redmond? Something shifted in Knox's chest, not the complete dissolution of the ice that had formed around his heart, but a definite thaw. He nodded, offering his arm in a gesture that felt both foreign and right. As they walked through town together, Knox noticed people watching them with knowing smiles. The gossip would intensify now, but somehow he found he didn't mind. Let them talk. For the first time in years, he was thinking about tomorrow with something other than dread. Winter settled over Brownsville with a series of snowstorms that transformed the landscape into a white wonderland. Knox found himself busier than ever checking on outlying farms after blizzards, breaking up cabin fever-induced fights at the saloon, organizing wood deliveries to widows and the elderly. Throughout it all, his relationship with Beatrice continued to develop, cautiously but steadily. They took supper together most evenings at the hotel restaurant, shared books and discussions on everything from politics to poetry, and slowly, Knox began to open up about his past, the good memories as well as the painful ones. In turn, Beatrice spoke of her dreams for the school, her hope to eventually add a high school curriculum, her desire to see her students have opportunities she'd taken for granted in St. Louis. Knox found himself not only listening but offering suggestions, drawing on his experiences in various towns and camps across the West. The most noticeable change, however, was in Knox himself. The permanent furrow between his brows had softened. The reflexive reach for his revolver when startled happened less frequently, and occasionally, rarely, but increasingly he smiled. Small, hesitant smiles at first, usually prompted by something Beatrice said or did, but genuine nonetheless. The first time it happened in public, a small upward curve of his lips in response to Tommy Wilson's earnest Christmas pageant performance. Sheriff Miller nearly fell out of his chair in shock. "Well, I'll be damned," the older lawman muttered. "Never thought I'd see the day." Knox's smile immediately vanished, replaced by his customary stern expression, but the damage was done. Word spread through town faster than a prairie fire. The grim deputy had smiled, at a children's pageant no less. Afterward, as Knox escorted Beatrice through the snowy streets toward her boarding house, she teased him gently about his moment of weakness. "I believe you've ruined your fearsome reputation," she laughed, her breath forming clouds in the cold night air. "Now everyone knows you're just a soft-hearted man beneath that stern exterior." "Not soft-hearted," Knox grumbled, though without real heat. "Just getting old, face slipping." Beatrice's laughter echoed in the quiet street. "Of course. Nothing to do with a certain 7-year-old forgetting his lines and declaring that baby Jesus probably cried a lot because babies do that." Despite himself, Knox's mouth quirked upward again. "Was a fair point. Indeed it was." Beatrice squeezed his arm affectionately. "You know, that's twice in one evening. If you're not careful, people might think you're actually happy." Knox stopped walking, turning to face her in the moonlight reflected off the snow. "Would that be so bad?" he asked quietly. Beatrice's teasing smile softened. "No," she replied, her voice equally soft. "It would be wonderful." Something in her expression, hope, tenderness, and something deeper prompted Knox to lean down and kiss her, a real kiss this time, not the brief touch they'd shared months ago. His arms encircled her waist as hers wound around his neck, drawing each other closer in the cold winter night. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Knox rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that again for a long time. What took you so long?" She whispered, her eyes bright with emotion. "Fear," he admitted honestly. "Still afraid I'll disappoint you, that I can't be what you deserve." "Knox Redmond," Beatrice said firmly, framing his face with her gloved hands. "You are exactly what I want, exactly who I want." Imperfections, past and all. The conviction in her voice was impossible to doubt. For the first time in 6 years, Knox allowed himself to fully embrace the possibility of happiness, of a future with someone who saw him all of him and wasn't afraid. "Not sure what I did to deserve you," he murmured, "but I'm grateful for it." Beatrice smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We deserve each other, I think, both of us trying to build something new from what life has given us." They walked the rest of the way to her boarding house hand in hand, their steps leaving paired tracks in the fresh snow, a visible symbol of the path they had begun to walk together. Christmas brought a temporary halt to the school sessions and a flurry of social activities throughout Brownsville. Knox found himself reluctantly pulled into various celebrations, dinner at the Wilsons', the town's Christmas Eve gathering, even a sledding party organized for the schoolchildren. To his surprise, he enjoyed most of these events, particularly seeing Beatrice in her element, surrounded by her students and their families. The joy she took in the season was infectious, gradually wearing down his reflexive aversion to holidays. On Christmas morning, Knox arrived at Beatrice's boarding house with a simply wrapped package, a gift he'd spent weeks preparing in secret. "Merry Christmas," he said awkwardly when she opened the door, holding out the package. "It's not much, but—" Beatrice invited him inside, away from the cold. "I have something for you too," she assured him, retrieving a package from beneath the small, decorated tree in the parlor. They sat together on the sofa, exchanging gifts. Knox watched nervously as Beatrice unwrapped her present, revealing a hand-carved jewelry box with intricate floral designs covering the lid and sides. "Knox," she breathed, running her fingers over the detailed work. "It's beautiful. Did you make this yourself?" He nodded, relieved by her evident pleasure. "Been working on it evenings at Wilson's shop. There's a false bottom," he added, "for keeping special things." Beatrice examined the box carefully, discovering the hidden compartment with delight. "It's perfect. The most thoughtful gift I've ever received." She leaned over to kiss him softly. "Thank you." "Open yours now," she urged, pushing his package into his hands. Knox carefully unwrapped the gift to find a leather-bound journal and a fine fountain pen. Opening the journal, he discovered a handwritten inscription on the first page: "For new beginnings, new memories, and the stories yet to be told. With love, Beatrice." "Thought you might want to write down your experiences someday," she explained, "or just your thoughts. I've noticed you keep a lot inside." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched Knox deeply. "Thank you," he said simply, but his eyes conveyed much more. They spent the day together, sharing a quiet Christmas dinner prepared by Beatrice's landlady. As evening approached and Knox prepared to leave, he found himself reluctant to end their time together. "Walk with me," he suggested, helping her into her coat. "Clear night, stars should be bright." They strolled through the snow-covered streets, greeting fellow townspeople who were also out enjoying the Christmas evening. Eventually, they found themselves at the schoolhouse, dark and silent during the holiday break. Knox led Beatrice to the small garden they'd planted together, now dormant beneath the snow. "Come spring, this will all bloom," he said, gesturing to the buried flower beds. "Those bulbs we planted, you asked if I'd still be here to see them." Beatrice nodded, remembering the conversation from months ago. "And will you be—" Knox turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "If you'll have me, I'll be here not just for those flowers, but for all the seasons to come." The implication of his words was clear, but Beatrice waited, giving him space to say what he needed to say. "I've spent 6 years believing I didn't deserve happiness," Knox continued, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. "Believing that what I'd done, what I'd lost, defined who I was." He squeezed her hands gently. "You changed that. Your laughter, your kindness, your stubborn belief in me, it melted something I thought was frozen forever." Knox took a deep breath, then lowered himself to one knee in the snow. "Beatrice Hayes, I'm not a perfect man, may never be, but I love you with everything I have left to give. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Beatrice's eyes, sparkling in the moonlight. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Knox Redmond, I will marry you." Knox rose, pulling her into his arms and kissing her with all the emotion he'd kept restrained for so long. When they parted, both breathless and laughing, Beatrice touched his face in wonder. "You're smiling," she observed. "A real smile." And he was a full, genuine smile that transformed his face, erasing years of hardship and grief, if only for a moment. "Got a reason to," he said simply. News of their engagement spread quickly through Brownsville. Most townspeople had suspected the direction of their relationship for months, but the confirmation still prompted congratulations, well wishes, and no small amount of satisfaction among those who had watched the grim deputy gradually come back to life under the schoolteacher's influence. Sheriff Miller was particularly pleased. "About time," he declared when Knox officially informed him. "Been thinking of retiring come spring. Good to know the town will be in capable hands." The winter months passed in a flurry of wedding preparations and plans for their future. They decided to build a house on a small plot of land at the edge of town, close enough for both to walk to their respective duties, but with room for a garden and perhaps someday, children. Knox threw himself into the construction with a passion that surprised even Beatrice. He designed the house himself, incorporating ideas from homes he'd built in his previous life as a carpenter, but adapting them to Beatrice's preferences. Wilson and several other townsmen helped with the heavy work, but the fine details, the carved banisters, the custom cabinets, the built-in bookshelves, those Knox crafted with his own hands. As winter gave way to spring, the house took shape, as did their shared vision for the future. Knox officially accepted the position of sheriff when Miller announced his retirement, effective after the wedding. Beatrice continued teaching, but began training an assistant to help with her expanded vision for the school. The first flowers pushed through the soil in the school garden, just as Knox had predicted, bringing with them a sense of renewal and hope. Beatrice found him there one evening after school, looking at the green shoots with an expression of quiet wonder. "They survived the winter," he observed as she joined him. "As did we," she replied, understanding the deeper meaning in his words. Knox pulled her close, kissing her temple. "Better than survived, grew stronger." Their wedding was held on a perfect May morning, with apple blossoms scenting the air and birds singing in the trees surrounding the white church. Nearly everyone in Brownsville attended, filling the small building to capacity. Knox stood at the altar in a new black suit, clean-shaven for the occasion, his dark hair neatly trimmed. When Beatrice appeared at the church doors, a vision in ivory lace with wildflowers in her hair, Knox felt his breath catch. The months of happiness had not diminished the wonder he felt each time he saw her. If anything, it had deepened. As she walked toward him, their eyes locked, and Knox smiled, a full, unguarded smile that lit up his entire face. Murmurs rippled through the congregation at the transformation. The man who had arrived in Brownsville grim and cold was gone, replaced by someone who looked at his bride as if she were the sun after years of darkness. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to cherish and support each other through whatever life might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Knox kissed Beatrice with a tenderness that brought tears to the eyes of even the most stoic townsmen. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with food, dancing, and much laughter. Knox surprised everyone, especially his bride, by leading Beatrice in a perfect waltz, the steps remembered from those private moments outside her boarding house. "You've been practicing," she accused playfully as they moved across the floor. "Maybe," he admitted with a small grin. "Wanted to do right by you." As the sun set on their wedding day, Knox and Beatrice slipped away from the celebration to the house he had built for them, their home, their future. Standing on the porch, he swept her into his arms, carrying her across the threshold as was tradition. "Welcome home, Mrs. Redmond," he said softly, setting her down in the front room illuminated by lamps he'd lit earlier. Beatrice looked around at the beautiful craftsmanship surrounding them, the perfect manifestation of Knox's reawakened skills and passion. "It's more beautiful than I imagined," she whispered, trailing her fingers along the carved mantelpiece. Knox watched her explore their home, his heart full to bursting with emotions he'd once thought himself incapable of feeling again. "Built it for you," he said simply. "For us." For whatever comes next, Beatrice returned to his side, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her head against his chest. "I love you, Sheriff Redmond, and I love you, Mrs. Redmond." Knox tilted her face up to his smile soft but sure, "more than I have words to say." As they sealed their promise with a kiss, Knox knew with absolute certainty that the ice around his heart had not just melted, it had been replaced by something stronger, something warmer, something that would sustain him through whatever the future held. The cowboy who never smiled had found his reason to laugh again. 5 years passed, bringing changes to both Brownsville and the Redmonds. The railroad had transformed the once quiet town into a bustling community, with new businesses opening regularly and a steady stream of settlers arriving to try their luck in Texas. Knox had proven himself an effective sheriff, maintaining order with a firm but fair hand as the town grew. His reputation had evolved from that of a dangerous gunslinger to a respected lawman, someone who could be trusted to uphold justice without unnecessary violence. He'd even trained 2 deputies, allowing him more time with his family, and family had indeed become the center of Knox's world. Their son, James Thomas Redmond, had arrived a year after their wedding, a sturdy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's laughing green eyes. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Sarah Elizabeth, named in honor of Knox's first wife, a healing gesture suggested by Beatrice herself. On this particular spring morning, Knox sat on the front porch of their home, watching 3-year-old Sarah chase butterflies in the garden while James, now 4, solemnly helped his mother plant summer vegetables in the beds alongside the house. "Papa, look," Sarah called, pointing excitedly as a monarch butterfly landed on a nearby flower. "It's orange." "So it is, little one," Knox agreed, his smile coming easily, now a common occurrence these days. "Better not catch it, though. Butterflies need to be free, like horses." She asked, her small face serious. "Just like horses," he confirmed, thinking of Storm, now growing old in the paddock behind their house, joined by Beatrice's gentle mare and a pony for the children. James abandoned his gardening to join the conversation. "Papa's going to teach me to ride the pony today," he announced proudly. "He promised." "After lunch," Knox reminded him, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately, "and only if you finish helping your mother first." Beatrice approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "The garden can wait," she said, smiling at her husband. "It's too beautiful a day to postpone adventures." Knox stood, drawing her into a brief embrace. "You sure thought those tomatoes were important?" "They are," she agreed, "but so is keeping promises to eager young cowboys." She gave him a quick kiss. "Besides, we have visitors coming. Best to have the riding lesson finished before they arrive." The visitors she referred to were the Wilsons and their children, coming for Sunday dinner, a regular tradition that had developed over the years. The carpenter and his family had become their closest friends in Brownsville, their children growing up together like cousins. The afternoon unfolded perfectly, riding lessons for James, with Sarah insisting she was big enough too. A shared meal in the shade of the oak trees Knox had preserved when building the house, and hours of conversation while the children played. As evening approached and the Wilsons prepared to leave, Mrs. Wilson hugged Beatrice warmly. "I'm still amazed every time I see him with those children," she confided, nodding toward Knox, who was showing James and the Wilson boys how to whittle a small wooden horse. "Remember how he was when he first came to town? Never thought I'd see him laugh like that." Beatrice followed her gaze, warmth filling her heart as Knox demonstrated a technique, his patience with the children endless, his joy in their company evident. "Love changes people," she said simply. "Sometimes it just takes the right kind." After the Wilsons departed and the children were bathed and put to bed, Knox and Beatrice sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. "Happy?" Knox asked, his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Completely," she assured him, nestling closer. "You?" Knox considered the question seriously, as was his way. He thought of the path that had brought him to this moment, the loss, the grief, the cold years of seeking vengeance, and then the gradual thawing that began the day he heard Beatrice laugh in that town meeting. "Never thought I'd have this again," he admitted quietly. "A home, a family. Purpose beyond just surviving." Beatrice squeezed his hand, understanding the depth of his words. "I'm glad you found your way here, to Brownsville, to us, to you," he corrected gently. "You're the one who saw something in me worth saving, even when I didn't see it myself." The conviction in his voice brought tears to Beatrice's eyes. "You saved yourself, Knox. I just believed in you until you could believe in yourself again." Knox kissed her softly, still marveling that this extraordinary woman had chosen him, had stood by him through his darkest moments, had given him children and a future he never dared imagine. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "More today than yesterday, more tomorrow than today." "And I love you," she responded, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Always." From inside the house came a small voice. "Papa, I'm thirsty," Knox smiled, rising from the swing. "Duty calls." "Indeed it does, Sheriff Redmond," Beatrice laughed, the sound still as musical to his ears as the first time he'd heard it. As Knox went inside to tend to their daughter, Beatrice remained on the porch for a moment longer, offering a silent prayer of gratitude for the life they'd built together. The cowboy who never smiled had not only found his laugh again, he'd found his heart, his home, his peace. And in doing so, he'd helped create a family filled with the love and joy he once thought forever beyond his reach.